How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the channel. As always, if you enjoy the video, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe. It helps out, means a ton. You guys get plenty of fun stuff, not just Jujutsu Kaisen. We cover plenty of manga on the channel, so stick around, check it out, see if anything else catches your interest. But getting into the topic of today's video, we had chapter 170 drop recently, or the fan translation. I actually think the official translation still has another day or two until it comes out. Anyway, that doesn't matter. In chapter 170, we ended off with Megumi letting out his domain expansion for the third time in the series. Now, considering since way back with the first time that he let his domain out, it was very incomplete, and up until now, Megumi is still stating that he has problems creating it just willy-nilly, at least when it comes to a full domain with barriers and all. So yeah, unlike most domains that we've seen throughout the series, we've gotten to see Megumi develop his as things have gone on, so I figured it'd be fun to go back, take a look at the evolution of Megumi's domain over the course of Jujutsu Kaisen so far, and then we can talk a little bit at the end about this newest time seeing the domain, exactly what we think he's doing, or all this kind of stuff. Anyway, so going back to the first time we saw Megumi ever use domain expansion, it was incredibly incomplete. Megumi even said how pathetic, and yeah, it wasn't actually a full domain expansion. It was just kind of a pool of domain on the ground. Now, this was really cool because it's Chimera Shadow Garden and Megumi fights with shadows, so it's this pool of black, goopy shadow mess that all of his Shikigamis can just fly out of and he can sink back down into. But we know for a fact that is far from a complete domain because we've seen people like Gojo and Mahito create domains that basically make like black reality marbles inside of our universe. It's just this three-dimensional, circular, spherical space that you can't see into. Megumi's just a flat plane. So yeah, still very impressive at his age being a first-year sorcerer to pull out any kind of domain at all, but yes, very incomplete. So, the second time we ended up getting to see Megumi's domain, it was quite a surprise actually. He kind of popped into Dagon's domain out of nowhere to save Nanami, Maki, and Naobito. So, before we get into this second case of seeing the domain, I want to jump back to chapter 170 real quick, because in chapter 170, Megumi stated that it's difficult for him to wrap his mind around the sensation of superimposing a completely fake object, making it real, and placing it over top of our actual reality and actual space. That concept, that sensation, is difficult for him to figure out. Now, going back to the stuff with Dagon, I actually think him pushing his domain against Dagon's domain was a very, very good learning experience for Megumi when it comes to utilizing his domain itself. This is because, well, this gave Megumi the sensation of pushing his domain against another one that is trying to encroach upon it. So, Dagon's domain in this second instance is actually kind of acting as the barrier for Megumi's domain. So Megumi doesn't have to worry about superimposing his domain on top of reality. He can just push it out the way he did originally, and he can use Dagon's to push against, making Dagon's the actual barrier, and then Megumi can just focus on pushing his domain harder and harder. And I actually think this starts to make a little bit more sense when you look at chapter 170 and this now third time that we've seen Megumi use his domain, because like I said, he stated it was difficult for him to get the sensation down and everything. And in chapter 170, Megumi ran into a gymnasium, looked around, looked at the walls, the ceiling, the floor, you know, everything that a domain has. Yes, a domain is spherical, and a gymnasium typically isn't a sphere, but, you know, it has walls on every side. It has natural barriers. So, with Megumi having the experience and the practice of pushing his domain up against another barrier, which was Dagon's in the first instance, in this third instance, he can use the gymnasium as that barrier. So now, all he has to do is the same thing he did the first and second time, push the domain out, put it out freely, open your mind to think about the concept, push it out. Then, just like he did in the second instance, he can push his domain out against the other force around it. In the second instance, that was Dagon's barrier. In this third instance, it is the walls of the gymnasium itself. So yeah, that is kind of how we've gotten to this point. But now we need to talk about the evolution of Megumi's domain going forward, because I'm in the camp that this is not a fully realized, fully completed domain. When I say that, it's kind of about the specifics and kind of about the gymnasium itself being there as a tool. Using real life walls to overlay your domain on top of and give it a barrier, that's kind of a cheat code. Maybe I just have really high standards. That is possible. I know for a lot of things like this in anime and manga, I typically hold characters to pretty high standards. They're anime and manga characters. They push past their limits and they grow constantly, guys. It's okay to hold them to pretty high standards. I'm just saying. Anyway, I consider that gym a little bit of a cheat code. Like I said, we've seen Gojo, we've seen Mahito, we've seen plenty of other people create these domains and just overlay this sphere on top of real space. This is not what Megami's doing, and this is kind of why I consider it an incomplete domain. I don't really consider the domain complete if the domain isn't doing all of the work itself. When I see Megami create one of those spheres just sitting out in the middle of open space, then we will say he has a fully completed domain. Until then, the usage of the gym, for me, makes it slightly incomplete. You are not forming barriers yourself, you're using natural barriers as a way to create them for you. So that's why I consider it basically incomplete. Now, it may be complete on the aspect of what Megami can do inside his domain, his attack potency, all of that stuff. That can just be like domain expansion level, he's made it that far, he's good. But the barriers, still a little bit incomplete because he didn't make them himself, he just used the physical ones to overlay his on top of. Now with this being said, I actually think this is probably the last stepping stone to Megami being able to do that full spherical domain out in the middle of nowhere by itself with no help and no assistance. This is because, well, this is kind of that final step. Using the walls of the gymnasium and the roof of the gymnasium as a way to get the feeling, kind of understand how it feels. So this is what it's like to make my domain like this with walls and a ceiling and everything. He can start to understand the feeling and the sensation of it by doing this. Then moving forward, as he gets a little more proficient and a little more experienced, he can then take the gymnasium out of it and start overlaying barriers on real space to create a fully realized domain with no help at all. Now, we have a couple different instances of domain expansions themselves in the series. We have the typical spherical domain. We also have the one that Sukuna made, which is basically just an invisible circle on the ground that counts as his domain. There is no sphere, there are no barriers at the edge of the circle. He just creates a circle, and that determines his attack range for his domain. So he actually has an insane amount of range on his domain, but there is no barrier keeping people inside, and it is actually said to be an extremely sublime technique, meaning this is very impressive that Sukuna can do this. I actually have a slight theory on what Sukuna is actually doing here, or what Sukuna did to his domain. If you look at a domain as a sphere, and you take it and open it up on the top, and fillet it open, now, of course, geometry is kind of weird. A circle would typically fillet open, and then there'd be weird little wrinkles, or you'd have to cut it, and it'd be like a flower-y shape, almost. Doesn't really matter. It's not an actual real object. You can take the circle and fillet it open into just a circle on the ground. It's fine. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about physics. It's not a big deal. It's anime and manga. Anyway, this is possibly what he has done. The floor is the only barrier that constitutes where Sukuna's domain actually is. He took the circle that typically has a barrier in 360 directions, opened it up and laid it out flat to where the barrier is only on the bottom. This then allows people to leave from any side. I think this is kind of what Sukuna might be doing. I don't think this is what Megami's going to do. From what we've seen from Megami, especially in this third instance where he is raising the domain into a, well, gems aren't spheres, we've been over this, but you know, an enclosed object. I think Megami is trying to go for the typical domain in the kind of spherical sense like Gojo and Mahito have. I don't think he's trying to do what Sukuna is doing, but you never know. It's a possibility. So I just realized this during editing, but maybe that is the final step to Megami's domain. Maybe Megami will also reach the same levels that Sukuna did. Maybe that whole filleting it out into the just circle thing, maybe that's the next step that most people don't take after reaching that full spherical realized domain. So maybe this will be another step at the end. So yeah, maybe Megami will get there, maybe he won't. Who knows? That's not what I think he's building to at the moment, though. I think at the moment, he's building towards that spherical type of domain. Anyway, yeah. Also, Higuruma has the, like, domain that's not, like, certain kill, but it's, like, certain hit and, like, the old school style of domains with older sorcerers, what they did a lot. Yeah, I don't think Megumi's doing that. I think it's kind of clear. But anyway, yeah. Ability. So yeah, I think the next step in the evolution of Megumi's domain is just the full domain. I think this is the final step before he gets to that full spherical dome thing of just death and chaos. That's going to be really terrifying for Megumi, because you get enclosed in this dome and then it becomes pitch black. That's going to be terrifying. Things are just going to be hitting you from all directions. You won't be able to see a damn thing. That's just got to be terrifying. But anyway, yeah, that's pretty much all I got for the evolution of Megumi's domain. We've been getting closer and closer, taking smaller and smaller steps to understand domains, getting used to pushing them out, getting used to having barriers around them, and now we can start to make those barriers and push it out all on our own in freely open space, and like he said, finally understand that sensation of superimposing your domain on top of actual reality. So yeah, we're almost there. Megumi's almost got his fully completed, no help, no assistance domain expansion. And yeah, I can't wait to see it. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, like I said, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe. And I'll see you next time. I'm out.